All right, everyone, welcome to the Harrisburg Area Geological Society March 2022 meeting. I see that our speaker is present, or it appears that way. Tonight we've got a great program for you. If you need your professional credits, make sure you put it in the chat log to everyone, your name and your PG number. Tonight, our very own Kent Littlefield, President Extraordinaire, will be presenting on the hydrogeology of the Peninsula, Iceland. He'll pronounce that tongue twister for you. Kent's been serving as our HAGS president for quite a few years. He earned his BA in geological sciences at Susquehanna University in 1979 and took graduate hydrogeology and engineering courses at Millersville University and Penn State University in the 80s. He was fortunate to work in the Ari Wright Associates with them in this very building where I am. I saw his name scratched into the wall somewhere. And that's when he had the unique opportunity to work on this project in Iceland. Now, later he worked for SAIC and Leidos and is recently semi-retired from the Hydrothermal group. He's had the opportunity to work on projects in 29 states and 2 foreign countries. And I think probably the most exciting is going to be the story from Iceland. So Kent, if you want to share your screen and do your thing.
All right, thanks, Rosanna. Thanks for hosting this for Mike, our treasurer, who had other things come up and he couldn't make it. And also Amy, our secretary, had something come up and probably or possibly can't make it either. I just scanned the attendees and didn't see her, so she'll miss us. I want to thank all the officers for all their work throughout the years getting speakers. Amy, again, for putting together those great email blasts that hook you all in and have you all tuning in for something like this. Also, having just prepared this, I was supposed to present this in December and something came up, and fortunately, when I think it was Charlie Miller was available to take over. But now I've got this together, and again, it takes some effort. So thanks to past and future speakers. It's quite an effort. It's also sort of fortunate that we're able to do this. Again, the remote thing with the magic of the World Wide Web, we can do this without imposing travel costs on speakers, and we can also provide this interesting commentary to people who can't drive all the way out from somewhere. And again, future speakers would be Mark Eisner, who will be next month on potentiometric trend analyses, and Charlie Cravata on factors affecting groundwater quality in Marcellus Shale region. So tune into that for the next 2 months. Last time I presented here, I was kind of seeing how fortunately we were that the oil was at $50 a barrel at the time, but of course after that it sank down to probably in the 30s a couple of, about a year or so ago, and of course, and now what's going on. I think I just wanted to comment a little bit on the Ukraine and how unfortunate and sad that situation is, and my best wishes for those people and for this all to work out. And I don't know if we're entering a new Cold War, but this topic relates to the last Cold War because Iceland was key in the Cold War. And I'll share my screen and start my my talk. I think I share my screen. Try that again.
Yep, we've got it now, Ken.
Sure.
Yep,
Okay.
nice.
All right. Well, again, at the end of the last Cold War, I was fortunate enough to spend a short amount of time in Iceland at the Naval Air Station in Keflavik. And I just wanted to add the astonishing hydrogeology, because it really was out of the world from what I had experienced in previously. Let me see if it'll advance. Okay. Now, quickly to get some things out of the way, I covered, you covered, Roseanne, get everybody on the chat log. And I think that relates to all the things. And we'll go. Okay. So the purpose of this was, again, as Harrisburg Area Geologic Society, we are trying always to find speakers, and occasionally some of the guys like me put together stuff. I've had this in my head, this talk, for many years, and it's been about over 30 years since all this occurred. But I felt that everybody would be interested in this. Everybody who's done hydrogeology and has in their head perception of like boomer transmissivities, large scale groundwater flows, groundwater velocities. And I just wanted to relate that to everyone. Again, up to that time, my perception was based on the tri-state, or, you know, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, the coastal plains, the carbonates, and this topped them all for that, for unusualness. And part of the unusualness was created challenges of trying to decode or characterize the hydrogeology, because there were limitations imposed, and we'll get into that. I think quickly, just to get to show some of my photos, I'll show you some local color on top of that. I want to acknowledge Dick Wright, who hired me to work at RE Wright. I had great respect for him. I got a lot of experience in a lot of different strange geologic cases and elsewise. Colleagues on this project, Ned Whaler, who's one of the vice presidents there, who was often my mentor. Eric Slavin was my supervisor, who near the end of this project resigned from RE Wright, which essentially resulted in me having to put together all the final reports on it. So that got me up close and personal with the data. John Wheeler did most of the data collection. He spent a year in Iceland drilling and sampling for the US Navy. And the Navy was operating Naval Air Station, Keflavik. The Icelandic Energy Authority was both our oversight and subcontractor to us on the project. And they engaged the University of Iceland for some of the project. Do you still see my screen, Rosanna?
Yeah, we can
Okay.
see the caveats.
Okay, good. All right. Again, this is just for your amazement. And as I said, I had limited time on site. My time on site was about 6 days, arriving at like 4 a.m. in the morning, and this was in November. So the sun came, as the song goes, the sun came up at 10 o'clock and it went down at 3, and we all shivered all day long. And since it's been about 30 years, I'll probably forget something. So questions would be appreciated at the end of this. As a location, the red square shows where Keflavik and the Nato base is in the now southwest corner of Iceland, about 26 miles southwest of the capital of Reyjavik. Quick review, the land area, you can read it all. Interestingly, this is one of the oldest functioning legislative assemblies. I did not know that before I went there. Also not listed here was it had at the time a startlingly high suicide rate, which I always thought was related to the darkness during the winter times. And I was corrected for that. Anyway, we'll move on from that. You all know this. Iceland is on the mid-Atlantic ridge where the plates are spreading, and it is entirely volcanic. Interestingly, to our project is one of the rift zones made landfall very close to our site. And the little toe there in this map is the study area. I did fortunately get to do a little bit of touring around here afterwards, after we did our work. Interestingly, there's recent seismicity. As you probably know, this is related to the rift areas, and also related to recent volcanic eruptions. If you haven't looked at this, there's a lot of web coverage with drone footage that's really amazing. And I'm not sure if it's still running, but it was running at very high cubic feet per second and creeping towards roads, filling valleys with lava. If you haven't looked, you should go look at this. We did see the first geyser, the name of which it was named here. And fantastic waterfalls, geothermal energy. This is kind of interesting because they turn their lagoon for the wastewater into a swimming spot. Unfortunately, when I was there, it looked like what it looks on the left. It didn't look entirely hospitable for swimming, although it was certainly hot in the pool. Some of the more interesting things was standing next to one of their the wells that produced the steam, and just was shaking the ground the whole time. It was quite scary. Rifts, there's rift valleys, amazing stuff going on with the water. And they have a large geologic participation on the Iceland. They have a department, the National Energy Authority, which does the energy, the thermal energy and hydro energy. And they take full advantage of all this natural energy. This is the rift zone up in the inland. And when we went into this rift zone, it was amazing. Those cliffs are about 30 or 40 feet high. And there's a waterfall that drops off. I'm looking down the graben in this picture, and it gave me the strangest feeling because I felt like I'd been here before. And sure enough, this was my Geo 101 course text, which is the same spot except from an aerial-like view. Off to the left, way out in the background, you can see a little white church. This little white church is where Iceland's parliament met back in the year 930. And in the left-hand picture, you can see all the steam coming out of the sides of the valley. Again, the rift zone. So down to business here. The Rosmhvalanes Peninsula is on the Reykjanes Peninsula. Keflavik and Njardvik are on the east sides. They are the two largest towns. And the Keflavik International Airport and the NAS Keflavik, Naval Air Station Keflavik. You can see the runway there. Again, you can also see the rift zone, the southwest northeast trending rift zone. And just above the U in Peninsula is where that active volcano is. I've seen pictures on the internet where they could see the sky glowing from Reyjavik. So, excuse me, just a background on NAS Keflavik. Iceland was basically fishing and sheep ranching and little horses and so forth. In World War II, it became a British base for convoy protection. U.S. Army had a base there, and in 1952, Iceland joined NATO. The Icelandic government dedicated an area to NATO operated by the United States. And this was the place where our aircraft would monitor Soviet submarines when they came out of their ports and keep an eye on them their entire time. The Cold War was over in the late 80s, early 90s. and our presence there ceased in 2006, leaving the runways and so forth as Keflavik International Airport. The site of Keflavik, it has a harbor, again, with fishing and so forth. And you can see the runways of Keflavik International. It was also used by the Naval Air Station. And around the runways were hangars for aircraft and other features, including, maintenance buildings, landfills, well fields, fire training areas, and so forth. So Ari Wright's work in Iceland in 88 and 9 to 89 was to conduct a preliminary assessment site investigation of NAS Keflavik and the International Airport and 2 municipalities to define potential pollution sources. The reason for that was there were volatile organics found in the water supply wells serving Keflavik and Njardvik. And our purpose was to find the sources. And to do that, we did a lot of historical review and sampling and so forth. While we were ramping up for that, they had a 20,000 gallon diesel spill. So we also had to remediate the diesel spill. Again, former sources of the VOCs were landfills, fire training areas, waste disposal areas, all kinds of things, maintenance of aircraft, and the laundry. As I said, we did a lot of sampling. We drilled 22 monitoring wells. We sampled them. We sampled all the supply wells on the peninsula. We did hourly groundwater elevation measurements in 18 wells for 28 days. That and mapped them, making 671 groundwater contour maps. We also collected precip, barometric levels, and we prepared hydrologic budgets and so forth. And the purpose was to determine what the areas of capture by the water supply wells by pumping, so we could determine what possible sources could be contributing to them. As I said, volcanic, Neopleistocene. There are 3 volcanoes located nearby, and as best as I could figure and have been told was they had erupted underneath glaciers. Bedrock is basalt, and it is highly variable from dense to highly vesicular, flows and scoria. No wells really could be correlated for stratigraphic understanding. Lava tubes were possible, and that idea came from what our hydro kind of showed, but we didn't see any. We didn't drill through any. We had no detections or knowledge of lava tubes, but there were the literature said there are sheet-like structures, dikes, and so forth along these, this southwest northeast extensional rift zone. So there's the former volcanoes, one almost right under the airport, one to the east of all the towns and one to the north. this kind of gives you an idea of how desolate this place is. Add to this desolation, lack of sunlight and constant wind and rain that goes sideways, which is about what I saw when I was there. Thin soil, ground moraine, morphology, you can see it. Hummocky, moss and grass, no streams. So every bit of precip goes into the ground. 32 to 54 inches a year of rainfall. I'd have thought more, but again, I was there when it was raining a lot. Negligible runoff. I don't know where they get the evapotranspiration of 16 inches a year, but that's what the literature says. And recharge is 35 inches per year. Now compare that to around here. Around here, you get about 8 inches a year of recharge to groundwater. So yeah, 1.7 million gallons per day per square mile. The Triassic is maybe 200,000. So that's kind of the we're starting to get into the wow stuff here. Again, they've got lots of groundwater. 16 billion gallons a year is the recharge to our study area, which was 25 square miles. They use 1.5 billion gallons a year. Now, other than the knowledge of seawater encroachment along the Delaware River and in the coastal plain deposits, I had never dealt with a freshwater lens on top of saltwater. This was the condition here, was 100 feet to 200 feet thick of freshwater on top of saltwater in the strata with a very high hydraulic conductivity. When we were researching the background, we had one pumping test on the entire peninsula, and it was for Sangurdi, 5 million gallons per day per foot. And we're like, what? Did they miss a decimal point? Storativity, okay, I could buy that. Here's some of the conversions out of the literature. Our post-glacial basaltic lava from meters per second, you do the conversions. And for hydraulic conductivity, K, and the transmissivity up to 300 million gallons per day per foot. Again, based on the background data. And we're like, yeah, is this real? We needed to test it. Comparison, always nice to have comparison. I pulled the data of places I thought, in my experience, had some really good transmissivities. As you can see, none of them get in the millions of gallons per day, per foot. Highest one there is at Upper Cohansey, and that's like pumping Maury #2 sand. Again, a little bit on the, let's see, do I have a carbonate? Yeah, Stonehenge formation. None of them even close. So we were highly skeptical. Again, we could buy the porosity ranging from 1% to 10%. It calculated groundwater velocities up to 50 feet per day. We're starting to get into tidal amplitude. The water body was going up and down maybe 4 to 13 feet in the harbor. 450 feet inland, we had 4.5 feet of tidal amplitude, which to me was unheard of. I had worked quite a bit along the Delaware River, which had a 7-8 foot tide, and I didn't see more than a foot at 100 feet in. And at 2,300 feet inland, we had 1 foot of tidal amplitude at this place. In fact, the entire peninsula is under a tidal influence. Again, the aquifer is a freshwater lens on top of saltwater, and it's all going up and down with the tide. We needed to do a pumping test, but the Icelandic government set a restriction on our pumping to 200 gallons a minute. Their concern being upconing of salt water. We needed to determine the transmissivity and storativity to figure out what the capture area was for the pumping wells that were contaminated with chlorinated solvents, PCE and TCE. But pumping at 200 gallons a minute, we couldn't even tell our pumping from the tidal fluctuations. We had some pretty good sized rainfall events. So we saw got some data from that to try and figure out storativity. So these were challenges here. Upconing, I don't know if you're aware of it. Again, if you don't work in an area with a saltwater depth, which some of you might, if you're up in the in Gasland area, up in the northern part of the state, if you do 1 foot of drawdown in your pumping well and you have a saltwater interface, it will pull that saltwater interface up 40 feet based on the difference in gravity of the two liquids. So this was what the Icelandic government was concerned about. They, in fact, told us they were more concerned with salt water than they were with chlorinated solvents. So we couldn't do a pumping test that was meaningful, but we had this monitoring well network here. And what we did was we got pressure transducers and installed them in 18 of these wells and monitored them. This was the 80s, folks. Pressure transducers weren't commonplace. They were set to take a measurement once an hour. And this is some of the results, a groundwater contour map. This was average conditions from all of those 671 groundwater contour maps, showing a groundwater divide. You can see the shoreline there on the right-hand side and the harbor. And the X's are the monitoring wells. The contours are in feet, which had, that was quite a challenge to get them to report things in feet, being that the Icelandic people were doing the measurements and the computer renditions of the data. This is the record from one of the wells. This one's 450 feet from the tidal water body. As you can see, the tidal function's pretty dramatic. You can see the new moon. You can see the full moon by the higher amplitudes. And you can see a trend of, in the beginning, we've kind of got recession, and then it goes up near the end of this period. This well is 1,100 feet. It's like 2 miles from the tidal water body, almost in the middle of the peninsula. We still have 0.2 feet of tidal influence. So this is the position of those two wells, just for your reference. So now I'm going to try something where hopefully I can get this video without disconnecting. Well, I got to unshare, I guess. And reshare. Oh boy. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble getting this to cooperate. There we go. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Okay.
Nope, still looking at you.
Oh, it's doing something. Yep, we
Okay.
can see it.
Okay. So this picture shows, we'll call it a flip cards of groundwater contour. North is to the left, and we'll run this again. And the shoreline is to the top of the picture. And you can see that tidal function. You can also see the groundwater divide, which was mapped in that other diagram. And you can see the other shoreline at the very bottom of the image there. So you see how active this groundwater contour is. These are half-foot contours. So it moves around a lot. Now the real question is, I'm going to go right to the next video. I hadn't planned on that, but I may have to. No, I'll try and get back on the PowerPoint here. Am I back on the PowerPoint?
Yep, we see the tidal variation slide. Good.
Okay. So these are two conditions for how tidal variations extend inland, and what you can do with them hydrologically, whether it's confined or unconfined. Obviously, if it's confined, the extent of the fluctuation goes much further. And you can look at these calculations at the bottom have transmissivity and storage in the formula. And you can rearrange these calculations and either calculate the ratio of T over S by the time lag of tide between the tidal water body and your monitoring well at some distance inland, or you can do it by the change in amplitude. But you need to know the storativity to do that. Now, we got a bunch of rainfall, so we were taking everybody's word that it's unconfined. The rainfall we saw recharged the groundwater, which would be effectively your effective porosity. So the T over S ratio based on amplitude was this, then we solved for the range of transmissivities. And this is in million gallons per day per foot. And as you look down through this, it's just astounding numbers, all the way up to 35.6 million gallons per day per foot. Now, another thing that was very unusual was we were also tracking precipitation. We were tracking atmospheric pressure. While we were there, we had a storm come through. Now, it didn't dump that much rain. I think we had about 2 to 3 inches over the entire period, cumulative. But we did have some really low atmospheric pressures dropping down into like 28 inches, dropping below 29 inches. And I'm like, that's like hurricane lows. At the same time, we had very high groundwater levels. And here we'll try this video. Now, the rain has already brought up water levels, but as you watch this thing, it's just going to keep coming up. And again, these are half-foot contours. And the amount of rain wasn't enough to explain this. We didn't have that much recharge. And it then came down to the barometric pressure and possible storm surge. The height of sea level often is raised underneath a extreme low of the type that went through here when we were monitoring. And we felt that was the reason for this very high water levels. So let me see if I can get back to the PowerPoint. Okay. Still with me?
Yep, we're back to the
Okay.
PowerPoint.
Good. All right. So again, with the change in levels by the rainfall, we estimated the effective porosities and plugged them into that table that I think I gave it to you out of order. Hold it right there. to obtain these crazy high transmissivities. We were still dubious of this. So we analyzed it another way. Check it again. We did an area discharge analysis. We have a basin, 7.5 square miles. We've got an average gradient. We know what the recharge is. And we did some recharge estimates. Eastern Basin, 9.6 to 12.5 million gallons per day. Western Basin, you can read it, up to 26.3 million gallons a day. So we plugged that into to a Darcy analysis. Basically, we knew what the recharge, the groundwater flow rate was from area discharge, the gradient, and this X is the width, the flow width of the flow phase that discharges out of there. So we had a transmissivity resulting from this calculation of a little less than 1 million gallons per day per foot. A little more reasonable. The Western Basin, a little bit higher. It's bigger, much less gradient, and 2 to 3 million gallons per day per foot, but still less than unreasonable 30s. So the rainfall was 3.6, and we did have unique conditions. We had a recessional, somewhat consistent in the beginning, with minor rainfalls. As you can see, that 0.2 inches in 4 days didn't do a thing. So, but the storm dropped the pressure to 28.3 inches, and rain was 1 inch in 2 days, which still isn't that much, and 1.2 inches in a week. It's not that much rain. But again, lots of groundwater level changes with the tidal influence. So we have this wide transmissivity estimate. I was more thinking at this point of, based on the tides reaching all the way in, that we either had lava tubes or some very large fractures on these rift zones that allowed that tidal fluctuation and those large transmissivities. But in the net, we went through to try and figure out, okay, what's the actual areas that these wells are controlling with groundwater flow when they're pumping. And well, as you might understand, that the 200 gallon minute per well limit that they placed on us isn't placed on these water supply wells. I think the highest one is about almost 500 gallons a minute. But again, with the transmissivities out here, that was an easy ask. The red circles are just estimates of capture based on Darcy flow. Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, there was very little known. Some of these wells, they didn't even know what they were pumping. So that was a little bit of a challenge. So as you can see here, Keflavik North, the width of the capture zone was almost a mile. That encompassed quite a bit of an area, but again, the groundwater divide was about here. A lot of waste areas, a lot of trouble sites were outside of that basin. So in conclusion, of course, the range was unbelievable, but they're more reasonable transmissivities, somewhere around 1 million or 2 million, are much near an order of magnitude higher than the best New Jersey sand I'd ever dealt with. Again, we needed to run various cross checks, various analytical gyrations, calculations to overcome the shortcoming of not being able to do a pumping test that was meaningful. The tidal influence was helpful. It's pervasive, but it also made it difficult to even see the effects from a pumping test. I'd never really dealt with a climatic event during any monitoring where the atmospheric pressure went down below 29 inches. The public wells had, as you saw on the picture, they had really large capture zones and encompass quite a few of the potential waste areas, but the most likely source of the PCE was a laundry, which was essentially a block away from the well field. And they were, of course, did dry cleaning and so forth. Okay, after we were done and sent in our report, the Icelandic and the US government negotiated replacement of the well fields for both the towns and probably the airport as well. The well fields were sited well south of any potential influence from NAS Keflavik or the dry cleaners or anything else out in the middle of nowhere. I have no idea whether or not any of the sources were remediated. Unfortunately, I think I just got the feeling that they weren't. The US government gave back the land and about 7 years later, and I have no further information on this. So now, hopefully you all have questions and you can let me compensate for all the things I forgot to tell you.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. That was very interesting. If people want to go ahead and put their questions in the chat, I can relay them to Kent.
Maybe while they're typing, if they're typing for the chat, those videos were put together as single groundwater contour maps, and again, like a flip chart. They were put on a VCR cassette, and then I had to try and figure out how to digitize them for this meeting here, but it worked out okay, other than me not knowing how to switch screens for you.
No, that worked. That worked fine. So with our first question we have from Alexander is, did any of the new wells that were drilled encounter any VOC contamination?
Several of them did. Again, several of them were drilled for the purpose of confirming or denying a given waste area. I'll just back up. One of the things I forgot to tell you was, one of the reasons I love HAGs is I get to listen to a story that has nothing to do with what I do every day dealing with these things. So I think this is about the first presentation I know of from HAGs that has something to do with contaminated groundwater and other than nitrates, of course, and volatile organics. So that I forgot to tell you. But the whole purpose of drilling was to confirm or deny some of those waste sites.
Okay. So another question we have just came in from Phil. Was only one of the water supplies identified as having contamination, or was it multiple supply wells?
Multiple. In fact, all of them had some and some types. There were, PCE was, of course, the one that was prevalent near the dry cleaner. But there was also TCE, which may have been breakdown of PCE, but there was also 111 trichloroethane. Again, with aircraft, they use a lot of that stuff. Surprisingly, we really didn't find that much contamination up around the potential source areas. I'll back this up a little bit to, if I can find, again, I didn't want to talk about contamination that much. Of course, that's the whole reason I was out there, but see if I can find the slide with the waste sites.
There we go.
There it is. Landfill, salvage areas, they're always good. Fire training areas. Well, of course, we didn't analyze for PFAS or anything because nobody knew about that stuff. The concrete plant mound was an interesting thing. The picture of the guy in the level B was me, because I had to sample the concrete plant mound, which according to local lure, it was full of toxic materials that were so bad that nobody knew what was there. A little bit other aside was my initial purpose of being sent there was to do the training of the drillers for OSHA 40 hour. And so after the first day, I said, hey, tomorrow I want you to all show up here clean shaven for your fit tests. And you can imagine what a room full of bearded Icelandic drillers had to think about that. But I told them, hey, look, just to show you it's not so bad, I'll shave my beard off too. Of course, they didn't know that I had to do that anyway, because after doing the training, I had to go out and sample unsupplied air. But that's that story. But yeah, they finally did. They finally shaved. Some of them had to bring their razor in.
All right, so there's a comment from Larry that said a great presentation and good work performed under very difficult conditions. Nicole says that, wow, that transmissivity is unbelievable. That would be very hard to remediate. So maybe it's good you didn't pinpoint.
Maybe not, 50 feet a day could be rinsing out. I looked over my reports. Of course, really the concentrations weren't that bad. Okay, I mean, I've seen much worse. Again, I didn't really want to make this a remediation talk.
Okay. So there's another question from Alexander. Was there any evidence that water from hydrothermal sources may have been affecting the groundwater sampled in the wells?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Okay. Where's the picture? Here we go. This hydrothermal plant was located. Can you see my pointer here?
Yep.
It was located somewhere around here. Actually, I need to there's a better map that shows where that is. Svartsengi is the name of it. And okay, it was around here, around that square, I think, right there. When I found out where they were putting their replacement well field, they're going to put their replacement well field here. That hydrothermal plant had a plume of chlorides that went out like this. So I'm not sure what investigation they used or did before siting that well field, because I wasn't asked to do it. The one thing I forgot to say, this was pretty interesting time. Again, this was the end of the Cold War. Just 1 year before we were out there, Reagan and Gorbachev met in Reyjavik to sign the, let's see, they signed a treaty for banning intermediate nuclear weapons and drafted a treaty for reducing strategic long-range missiles. I think that was called the START, something like that. Which of course, it probably wouldn't have been relevant except for now Ukraine.
There's a question from Greg. There must be a large dilution attenuation factor of TCE/PCE with the high transmissivity in groundwater flows. Was that factor estimated?
No. We did not determine the source concentrations, only the impact concentrations, most of which were less than 100 micrograms per liter. Again, I don't know if they ever remediated anything. I wanted to.
Okay. So a question I had is if you had been allowed a greater pumping rate, do you think you would have gotten sufficient results, or was that upconing risk that like real of a threat? Like, were they being too cautious, do you think?
I think they were being too cautious, yeah. Again, they were allowing their water supply wells to pump at 400 gallons, almost 500 gallons a minute. But then the question is, would we have seen it in a monitoring well nearby? And I don't know about that. It's actually the tidal function estimate was probably the best, but again, I'm more comfortable with the area discharge analysis. But of course, that implies a lot of assumptions, the area discharge analysis.
Okay, do we have any more questions from folks? You want to put it in the chat? I did have one where I really liked your flip charts with the tidal influence. I thought that was very cool.
It was fun to try and figure out what was going on.
I was wondering if that encouraged any mixing of the VOCs.
Oh, I'll
Kinda
bet it
looked like-
did. I think it did. Hit it again here that, I don't know, the thing that really amazes me is how it just at one point when that low pressure system comes through, these water levels just climbing up. Now we had a little bit of a row with the Icelandic oversight, arguing about barometric influences. And again, everything we knew was that it's unconfined, but it doesn't mean that there isn't some bit of confinement.
So it's like watching a lava lamp there.
Yeah. Well, I have like a 20-minute, these are just clips, a 20-minute video. Okay. All right.
All right, we thank you very much for your presentation, and
Thanks for letting me do it. And again, we'll encourage all of you. I'm sure every one of you has a story that could be interesting to the rest of us. That's probably what I enjoy the most of coming to HAGS meetings, is hearing those stories and going, wow.
yep, sounds like a call for speakers.
Yep,
Dig
it
through your
is.
old files and dust
Yep.
off an interesting story for us.
Or else I'll have to get another one out. Okay. Well, thank you very much, and you all have a good evening.
All right, thanks everyone.
Okay.